General Edwards is now going to have to sing a little bit for his lunch. He's a 1973 graduate from the Air Force Academy, and he's done very well over the time that he has been an active duty up until about 1980, and then over at the Colorado Air National Guard from that period until now. He is not a substitute for Mason Whitney, because Whitney went on down to Florida and left the whole job of being the Adjutant General to General Edwards. And I'm sure that he's had a lot of misgivings about Mason Whitney's retirement, but at the same time, we are awarding him the honorary position because of his contribution to the civic work as well as the work of humanitarian nature that the National Guard has been very active in. I'd like to introduce again General Edwards.
Well, thank you so much, and what a privilege it is to become an honorary member of Rotary Club 31. It really is an honor, and I very, very much appreciate that. And I really appreciate the opportunity to join you today and spend a little bit of time talking about the state of the Colorado National Guard and maybe provide you a little bit of information that you might not be aware of. But before I do that, I want to just say thanks to the Rotary for all you do. You are really, when you look at it, we're almost the same when you look at the Colorado National Guard and you look at the Rotaries, because we're all about supporting our community and taking care of people. So it's only fitting that I should become a member. So I really appreciate that a lot. So thank you. Thank you for all you do. When you talk about polio and showing a picture of Ethiopia, President Alison was asking me, I bet you've traveled all over the world. Well, I have. And I've actually been in Ethiopia. I've been in Djibouti just this past year. And when you look at I will use the word squalor, they need our help. And they need assistance, especially taking care of the young children out there that are really lacking in medical care. So thank you for all you do. Really appreciate that a lot. The Branch Rickey banquet, I want to say thank you. Unfortunately, I didn't get to attend last year, and I'm going to be out of town this year too. But we will have representation here, and so we thank you so much for sponsoring veterans and active military members to be a part of that, because that's always such a special occasion when you're recognizing an athlete for their contributions to the community. And my brother would kill me since I can't make it because he's a big Dodger fan. But the candidates that you picked, Doug Dickey, or R. Dickey, and now Clayton Kershaw, the things that they do, what a wonderful thing to honor them. So thank you so much for that. Really appreciate that. Well, just a little bit about the Colorado National Guard. And I'll try to keep these kind of short so that I can take questions, because hopefully I'll encourage you to think a little bit about some things that you might be curious about that I might not cover. So you're Colorado National Guard. We've been around since 1860, so before Colorado was even a state, the National Guard was established here in Colorado. And when you look at the Constitution, that's where the National Guard comes from, because it's in Section 1, Article 8, that the states will have a militia. And that's what your National Guard is, responsible for federal and state missions. So Colorado founded their National Guard in 1860 really to support community members right here in Denver, before it was called Denver. It was Auraria and Jefferson County. And they needed help because law enforcement could not basically control the situation. And there was a group of ruffians that were causing the citizens of the territory a difficult time. And so they stood up the militia here in Colorado in 1860, kind of put that down and helped law enforcement out, and things kind of settled down a little bit better. Well, in 1862, the federal mission kicked in when Colorado was basically asked to use volunteers to go all the way south into New Mexico to stop a Confederate advance coming forward during the Civil War to try to take over the territory and get a hold of the gold and silver and all of the things here to basically finance the Confederacy. Well, Coloradans basically marched 400 miles in 18 days and went to battle the very next day, and they stopped the Confederates at a place called Glorieta Pass. And that was the only and the last time that the Confederacy tried to do an end run here in the West to try to take over the resources that they needed. So since that time, in 1862, your Colorado National Guard has been involved in every major contingency that the United States has been involved in. Every single one. Whether it be the Spanish-American War, whether it be World War I, whether it be Panama, whether it be Desert Storm, to now basically operating before we came out in Iraq and Afghanistan. We've deployed over 7,000 guardsmen, over 7,000, since 9/11 in support of the war on terror. So we're busy. We currently have, in fact, they're on their way home, but we have less than 100 right now because of the drawdown deployed, but we've got Special Forces folks that are coming home basically in the next week to 2 weeks, and we are so glad to get them home because unfortunately we lost a soldier here about 3 weeks ago who was part of that force. We are very, very happy to get them home. So we've been very busy. On the Air Guard side, we've deployed really for the last 20 years in the Middle East to support no-fly zones as well as Iraqi freedom and enduring freedom. And today as we sit here, we have a 24/7 commitment to perform aerospace sovereignty alert, basically to protect the skies of Colorado against anything that might happen here. And we've been doing that since really 2 hours from the second airplane hitting the World Trade Center on 9/11. So you've got folks that are on call 24/7, 365 in the National Guard taking care of situations on a federal side of the business. Well, the unique thing about the National Guard is that we do have that state role. Again, 1860, we were founded to help law enforcement. And again, someone over here is a constitutional expert. But that's the unique thing about the National Guard. We can be utilized in the state to do law enforcement missions to help out our local folks. And then in other emergencies, we are the military's first responders. Have been for really since our founding and will continue to be well into the future. So when you look at the state missions that our Colorado National Guard has been involved in, since 1860, there have been hundreds of missions that Colorado Guardsmen have been activated and served for, whether it be floods, fires. And interestingly enough, because of this summer, you know, people are worrying about what's next because it's been such a crazy summer. And so they mentioned locusts or frogs. Interestingly enough, your National Guard was activated during the Dust Bowl days to actually spray locusts. So we've been there, done that one. We don't want to do that one again. But that's truly what we are. We're a federal yet state militia that can do two missions, which our active duty military really can't, nor can our reserves. They have to have a federal declaration and the President of the United States to authorize them to do things within the country to do emergency response. But the National Guard is always there because the governor controls us during peacetime. And that's the unique thing about the National Guard. So, thought I'd talk to you a little bit about what's going on today and the flood response. When you look at the flood response, who would have ever thought that we would have basically a full year's amount of rain over a period of 72 hours in mountainous terrain? I don't know if any of you had the opportunity to fly over it or see it, but I have. And the devastation is amazing. And when I, you know, by trade, I'm a fighter pilot, but I got my degree in civil engineering at the academy, and so looking down at the roads and just the havoc and the communities that were just totally flooded, I mean, I was scratching my head going, how are we going to get this back on track? Well, I'll tell you, our governor has led the state in an amazing manner to obtain FEMA help, to obtain all the help that we can get here in the state. And he's even gone so far to keep our Guard on state active duty status when the federal government shut down to enable us to continue to do that mission. And I wouldn't have given you really a dime to be able to start opening highways the way we're opening highways right now, whether it's CDOT with help from the National Guard, CDOT with help from different contractors out there. So this state is really an amazingly resilient state. So during the height of the flood response, we ended up having over 750 military members helping. One of the interesting things is that when and Colorado, in my humble opinion, has been one of the first states to really crack the nut on the use of active duty military in response to life, limb, and property. So when we responded, we actually had active duty helicopters from Fort Carson, National Guard helicopters from right out here at Buckley, going forward together with the active duty Army kind of covering the Boulder area and the Colorado National Guard covering the areas further up towards Lyons and Jamestown. And during that time when the helicopters were working at it, they rescued over 3,200 folks, over 1,800 pets. And, you know, and it was interesting when you say pets. What we discovered when we responded to Hurricane Katrina is that people would not leave their homes or take an evacuation order if you did not take their pet. So people love their pets. And so if you're going to ask someone to evacuate, you need to take their pets. And so we did that. That was the Rotary Wing side of the business. Meanwhile, we set up security checkpoints to assure the citizens that their homes, their property, would not be invaded by someone trying to take advantage of a difficult situation. So as I stand here today, we are still in the process of flood recovery as a National Guard. Again, the unique thing about us as a National Guard is we can go to other states to ask for help if we have utilized the resources within our state to the extent that we can. So we've had help from other states while we've been operating and fixing the road between Lyons and Estes Park. So we've had folks from Utah, we've had folks from Montana, currently have folks from Kansas, and it's just amazing to watch our guardsmen come together and work together to make a project really work. And we're way ahead of schedule. We don't do the finish work, we just ensure that passage is available because of different laws that affect the use of the Guard. But we're way ahead of schedule up there and should be done with our work by the 6th of November, when the goal was 1 December. So we're very tickled about that, especially since the people can get back to their homes and start resuming a normal life. And that's really kind of what we're about and what's going on today. The thing that you'll find from those engineers that are up there working, and it's really interesting to talk to them, whether they're from Colorado or the other states that I mentioned, they are working hard. They're very happy. In fact, they will say, we don't want to quit at 5 o'clock. The sun's still up, yet we're trying to get them out so we can get them to shelter so we're not dealing with the darkness side, but they want to keep pushing hard. And they have a smile on their face because they say, this is so important to us to know that we're here in our home, at home, taking care of our own citizens and not getting shot at. That's a big deal. And so they're very, very motivated and extremely proud of what they're doing for the citizens of Colorado. And of course, our gratitude goes out to all of them. So a little bit about the future, and then I'll open it up for questions. You know, as I stand in front of you today, we are in, and we went through a government shutdown. We've got sequestration going on. It really puts the Department of Defense at an interesting juncture in our history. We have kind of grown up, our generation has grown up from the Cold War years to now with a rather large standing active duty military force. So our leadership is used to that large standing military force of active duty folks, and they're having a difficult time trying to figure out how they're going to preserve the capacity needed to defend this great nation with our national strategy. Many of us as Guard members believe that you preserve capacity by shifting some of the structure to the National Guard. When you look at our cost, we are a very small cost to the defense budget for the bang that you get. About 7% of the DoD budget gets you about 40% of the force structure. So we believe that you can actually shift a little bit more. Again, don't want to go too far, but we believe you could shift a little bit more to the Guard and Reserve to preserve capacity while we shrink the active duty force because of the cost to maintain a standing active military. Our country's history outside of the Cold War is firmly that of a militia nation, where the National Guard has always been a rather large force and the active duty force has been somewhat small. And it is getting smaller as I talk about it, but it may need to get smaller again so that we can preserve capacity versus sacrificing size and capacity. So that's kind of what we're facing here in the future. And here in Colorado, I see Representative Ryden's here. She pays close attention to Buckley Air Force Base. We have an Air National Guard presence and we have an active duty presence there, and we are working our tails off to ensure the future of Buckley will be solid. And part of that is that force structure discussion that we're having. I'm also working very closely with the folks down in Colorado Springs, El Paso County, and in Pueblo to ensure that Fort Carson, that Peterson Field, that Schriever, that the United States Air Force Academy continue to be looked upon as an extremely valuable resource to our nation, not just for Colorado, but they're very important to Colorado. So that's kind of what we're looking at as far as the future goes, is how do we figure out how to balance our force to ensure that we can continue to defend this great nation and preserve the rights and freedoms that we all so enjoy. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions you might have. If I encourage you to anything you're curious about, I'll do my best to answer or say I don't know.
I have a question here. Thank you for your remarks. So let's say that a reservist makes $50,000, $60,000 a year, gets called to go and help with a flood. So who pays them during the time that they're called to active duty, and how much pay do they get? They'll get their civilian pay, I'm assuming. And then does that come from the DoD budget or from the state budget or FEMA?
That's a really good question, especially in this particular situation. When we started out with a state active duty declaration, which means the initial funding comes from the state. When the governor went to the president and got it declared a federal situation, then the money shifted. Then it started to become a DoD-funded federal response with National Guardsmen operating. So it gets a little bit complicated. The salary side, the pay type situation, here in Colorado, we are paid at a rate, if we're on state active duty, that is not equal to, but similar to your federal status. So if you're a captain on active duty or in the Guard and you're called to state active duty, you will be paid basically at the captain's wages that you would have from a federal status in state active duty. When you go federal, then the DoD is basically paying that. And let me tell you, the training and the equipment that we possess as a National Guard are all funded by the federal government. And it goes back to a law that was passed in 1903 called the Dick Act. And that's how the National Guard really became more modern and started being funded by the federal government, which gave the federal government that opportunity to use us overseas and do dual status type. Hopefully that answers it. You bet. Yes, sir.
Yes, and thank you, first of all, for all of your service. But I'm curious, how is the Guard utilizing drone technology in its mission here in Colorado? The drone technology, how's the Guard using that in Colorado?
Here in Colorado, we have not really used the unmanned technology. We thought about it during the Black Forest fire because, you know, a drone can basically stay airborne a little bit longer and kind of give you a constant picture. But we basically ended up not going to that far, because here in the U.S., the Federal Aviation Administration still isn't comfortable with just allowing unmanned flight over areas that are not what we call restricted airspace. So it becomes a very complicated effort to try to get a drone airborne in places that are not restricted airspace. That effort is still going forward because they have used them in California in the wildfire situations out there. And so we expect in the future that may become more of a player for us, so that you have eyes on and you're seeing basically continuous live feeds as to what's going on with the fire. When we looked at the flood situation, we thought about it, but when the flood was happening, there were a lot of clouds, and so a drone really wasn't going to work for us. So it ended up being really a rotary wing effort to survey damage, come back and it'd be 2-hour-old damage when you landed, but that's basically how we were evaluating. Thanks.
Thank you. Welcome to Rotary. I'm over here. There you go. Welcome to Rotary. I now have two questions. One is with the drones and flying them over Deerfield and their ability to be shot down, I guess, is number one. And the second question goes back to old news in Syria. Could you summarize what our options are for a limited engagement in Syria to be effective and not get us knee-deep into their problems with boots on the ground?
That's a tough one. I'll answer the unmanned vehicle situation and the ability to shoot them down. They can be shot down. It just depends on what capability the enemy has. And where we've been able to use drones very effectively, most of those countries don't have a lot of anti-aircraft ability to shoot something down. And of course, most of our drones are pretty small that are doing the operations right now, so they're hard to see and they're hard to hear because they're not making a lot of noise. So they can go places and do things because of what and I'll basically say what our total Air Force has been able to do over those particular countries, which is to have and achieve what we would call total air dominance. So there's not really too much of a threat to shoot a drone down. Now, if we try to take a drone and put it over, let's say, China, we're probably not going to be very successful because they have the ability, a lot bigger ability to shoot it down. So you really have to have sovereignty over the air and space to have a drone and have it be effective. It's one of the things is why we continue to go manned. The question about Syria, I wish I had an answer for you. I'll give you an opinion, okay? This is a Mike Edwards opinion. We are actually, as a National Guard from Colorado, we're partnered with the country of Jordan. And so we spend a lot of time over there in the Middle East with the Jordanians. We end up with folks basically discussing options and working on a Syria-type situation. And what I would tell you is we're probably late. And why I say that is because the opposition in Syria is so fragmented right now, it's hard to figure out who to support. Now, there's a strong effort trying to figure that out. So a military response to Syria would be a very difficult one because, again, you're not sure who's going to be the governing body when you take Assad out or you take his party out because it's so fragmented right now. In fact, some of the opposition are fighting among themselves. So it's a really difficult situation, and it truly is a civil war in Syria. So we're a little bit late. I would tell you that about 9 months ago to 6 months ago, there was a little bit more of a focused opposition that we probably could have maybe helped support then, that today I'm not sure we could. As far as a military strike or a military situation, it would be difficult. We don't have the air dominance that I talked about over Syria, so it would take a huge effort on our part to stop the anti-aircraft, the weapons that they have in Syria, so that we could do kind of a clean operation to ensure that Assad was out and then to ensure that the country could come back in kind of a peaceful manner. Plus, we've got those honorary Iranians that are a part of that issue too. So there is no good answer right now, in my humble opinion.
I think we have time for one more. President, yes? No?
We have one more?
I think I see one right there.
Would you amplify your 7% of the cost and 40% of the effectiveness as we try to go forward with less Department of Defense resources?
You'd like clarification on the 7%, 40?
Talked about that the National Guard was 7% of the cost, but that it, as you were looking for leveraging a declining Department of Defense budget, I thought you alluded to a 40% effectiveness or a 40% bang for your buck, and maybe I misunderstood what you were saying.
It's exactly right. When you look at the DoD budget, for instance, the Air Guard, which I'm a member of, our budget comes directly from the United States Air Force. For our Army National Guard, the budget comes directly from the Army. And so we're kind of the last child that's seeing the budget, and so it's a small portion. When you look at the National Guard, on the Army Guard side, about 20 to 23% of our force is what you'd call a full-time force. The rest of them are normal citizens of the state who have jobs in the civilian world. You're only paying them when they come to a drill weekend or when they're called to duty. So they're this force that's sitting out there with a readiness level, and that readiness level depends on how much funding we end up having that can come and respond. So that's where the real cost savings is with the National Guard, is personnel costs. Equipment, like I said, it's federally funded, so whether it's a F-16 on the Air Guard or a F-16 on the active duty side, the cost of the equipment is pretty much the same. So our real savings is in our personnel cost. On the Air Guard side, about 40% of our force is a full-time force and 60% is traditional. And the difference is the Air Force, probably back in the late 70s, decided that they would maintain the readiness of an Air National Guard unit at a level that is fairly equal to an active duty unit. The Army made the decision, we're not going to fund quite at that readiness level. And so that's how it kind of fluctuates and balances. So the real savings in the future, and why I say we can preserve capacity, is that ability to have personnel that you're not paying 24/7, 365 a year. You're only paying them when you're using them. That makes sense? Yes, sir.